If I may begin by being more than a little personal, your appearance is slightly disturbing, almost animal-like. How does this occur?
I am the creature questioner of a quite remarkable man who fashioned me with his own hands.
Who was this remarkable man, then?
Squire Charles Waterton fashioned me. He was the last of the great British eccentrics.
Well, that's quite enough of that, but only an inkling of what eccentricity meant in the 19th century. These are all the creations of a man at once weird, eccentric, and hilarious, one of the last great amiable British nuts. Yes, Squire Charles Waterton, ornithologist, explorer, conservationist, bricklayer, taxidermist, and inventor of the better rat trap. This is your life. And that life began here, at Walton Hall near Wakefield, where generations of Watertons had fought the Reformation and the rats. Padding barefoot about the estate, no Waterton had fought convention with quite the same vigor as Charlie. Espying oddities wherever he went, his was the outdoor life. In fact, even in winter, the doors to Charlie's mansion were always open. And with admirable logic, in midsummer, big fires blazed at Walton Hall. Whenever Charles was there, life was always a little livelier. The barefoot old gent would pop up everywhere, so tatty he was often mistaken for his own servants. He'd commune with his feathered friends in the treetops, with an agility that lasted into his 80s. And scrambling to earth once more, he'd turn to bricklaying, building follies, dozens of them, now sadly in ruins. He was a serious scientist too, and his scientific methods were nothing if not imaginative. His method of taxidermy, for instance, was quite revolutionary. All these birds and animals in here are completely hollow. He'd found a method of strengthening and preserving the skin, so that in all the animals the colours are bright and alive and beautiful. And he solved some pretty thorny scientific problems as well. Scientific problem number 1, how to examine the bite of the vampire bat. Charles's answer certainly had flair. In the jungle he would sleep with his feet sticking out the bottom of the mosquito net, so that any passing vampire bat would be tempted to take a chunk out of him. This, he reasoned, would wake him up in time to examine the fresh fang marks. Scientific problem number 2, how to prove that a snake is immune to its own poison. Before a jittery and totally disbelieving audience in Leeds, Charles demonstrated. He seized the snake by the neck and by the tail and forced the two together until the snake had to bite its own tail. And he proved the theory. The snake lived, albeit a little scarred in the rear end. Scientific problem number 3, what to do with all the bits and pieces left over after his taxidermy? Simple enough. Charles just stuck them all together. Look at this, for instance. The head of a monkey, the body of a badger, and the shell of a turtle. In fact, Charles was never one to let the facts get in the way of a good story. Look at this fellow. Once upon a time, he was an exotic monkey from the jungle, but Charles remodeled the face to make it look just like the first Lord of the Treasury, who had angered him by charging duty on some specimens he brought back to Britain. He called this thing the nondescript. His lordship must have been delighted with the likeness. But jokes apart, Charles was the very first conservationist. In an age where everything that moved got shot, Charles had the humane idea of just looking at animals. He built the first sanctuary, a wall round his estate to keep the animals in and the poachers out. He constructed nesting boxes for the smaller birds, and in the lake, sandbanks for the heron. And everywhere he built hides, out of stone and out of wood, where he would sit and watch his dumb friends. Except the rats, who suffered from his better rat trap, and the pike in his lake, which he fished with fearsome skill. And not for him a rod and line. No, Charlie had his servants drive the pike down the outlet pipe from the lake, where he stood suitably armed. Life did have its surprising moments for all the animals on Charles's estate. For instance, the old boy wasn't content with just watching birds, he had to fly. He planned to launch himself into space from his dovecote, incidentally believed to be the highest in England. Fortunately, one of his friends happened by and persuaded him that a practice flight from a lower roof might help to get his wings run in, as it were, and Charles agreed. So happily, he only broke his ankle instead of his neck. Nothing he did was ever predictable, not even his death. Charles died with his boots on, or rather in his case with his bare feet on, cutting the brambles by the lakeside. He fell in and, spluttering to the surface, discovered he could cut the brambles much better actually standing in the lake. So he did, and caught pneumonia.